First real job was as a food service worker serving meals to terminal patients in a hospital. This hospital is old, and I've heard stories about it being haunted. And after working there, I definitely say it was creepy as hell. At the time, I didn't mind it though. All in all, I found it pretty interesting. I'd even go as far as saying thank you when the elevator doors would open and no one was there, or I smelled perfume in the hallway. The floor I worked on was Tower 2, T2. It was the terminal ward. Everyone started there. After working at the hospital in Tower 2, then you can be transferred out to work in the more happy floors, like the maternity, serving mostly new moms and happy people. But we all had to start here. The floor plan wrapped into a figure 8 with the nurse's station on one side and the kitchen in the other. I heard before the renovations 10 years ago, all the kitchens used to service the floor's morgues. I just found it interesting. It was a confusing layout at first, but I got used to it and settled into my position pretty easily, even making friends with some of the more long-term patients. It was bittersweet though, making these connections, caring for someone just to watch them suffer. One room would be filled with balloons and get-well flowers and loved ones, and the next room would be empty and cold, and the person would just be alone. That was the hard part. It seemed to better have some level of detachment to simply protect yourself, especially because I was such a softie. There was one patient who was my absolute favorite, before I learned this valuable lesson, of course. His name was Mr. John. He was an older gentleman, a war veteran who never disclosed his age, but he had no family or any children. His room was always lit up by the television and smelled like oranges from me sneaking Jello cups in there and telling dirty jokes. He had a humor and a quick wit that I understood, and I genuinely loved Mr. John. It's kind of like that father figure I never had. It was so hard seeing Mr. John grow sick and weak over the months, unable to eat and talk sometimes, or even stay awake comfortably. I was so scared that I'd come in and he'd be in the ICU where I couldn't see him at all. That wasn't the case though. I came into work, and before I could check his room, the nurse informed me that Mr. John's family have come to pick him up and take him home instead of being transferred to hospice. That's funny, I thought. Mr. John said he has no family. As I stepped into the room, Mr. John sat crooked in his wheelchair with a blank, frozen stare and seemed almost catatonic. It surprised me. I didn't recognize him and I rushed in face to face to see what was going on. As I did this, I could feel a huge presence behind me. Startled, I turned to face two huge men, I guess I could call them. They were wearing one John Lennon glasses that dug into his face, his overgrown face. They were both of them easily over 6 foot tall. They looked like they raided a Salvation Army for their clothes just before they got to the hospital, and they smelled musty. One guy, I couldn't even see his eyes, and what was really strange is they didn't seem to have a nose, just 2 holes in their face, or eyebrows, or really shoulders, their head just attached to their torso, reaching down to 2 pudgy legs. I don't even remember seeing arms. Startled, I turned, "Excuse me, you must be," but before I could finish, the larger of the men, whose mouth was a little open, started drooling. It was more than drool. It was like someone turned on a faucet and it was just pouring out of his mouth. I couldn't help but stare. I know I was staring, but I was completely disgusted, and yet I couldn't turn away. I didn't know if I was even imagining the whole thing, but the sound of the spit hitting the tile floor woke me up from this nightmare just as the nurse shoved her way back into the room, past the men without even a glance, and grabbed Mr. John's wheelchair and started to wheel him out. Wait! I tried to grab onto her arm, but they shoved their bodies in front of me and started to walk out of the room. I ran to the nurse's station and I tried to explain to the head nurse about the two creepy guys and the drool, and I just sounded crazy. She comforted me, telling me, I know, Betty, they are very creepy. I want them out of here too, but they do have all their documents. We can't hold him any longer. Right when she finished her sentence, I heard the beep of the elevator. I turned my head, and the elevator was already starting to close. That was so fast. And as I stared at the two men and Mr. John's broken body in front of them, the man started to wave. As he waved, he started to open his mouth, and his mouth kept opening wider and wider, inhumanly wide, like a nutcracker. And water started to pour out of his mouth as the elevator doors closed. I instinctively ran down the fire escape to try to catch them. I know I could catch them. We're on the second floor. I ran down the hall and I got myself in position in front of the elevator. I didn't even know what I was going to do. And when the elevator doors opened, it was empty, except for Mr. John's wheelchair and a puddle of mucus-colored drool sitting there on the seat. I kind of went blank after that, and I ran towards the nurse's station. I grabbed my bag, and I ran out of the building. I never told them why I quit. I think they would just think I was crazy, but I'll never go back to that hospital ever again. Never.